Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. We have a little bit of a preview here today of something that I was sent. So the folks who now own Flying Buffalo have decided that they are going to enter the counter tray market with this product. This is the Aegis storage counter tray. This is brand new counter tray. It's the first new counter tray we've seen in the wargaming hobby in a couple of years since DVG. Actually, since Lock and Load came out with their deep dish tray, the Lock and Load deep dish tray is pretty nice. I don't have any examples because it's kind of weird to buy it because you have to buy it in like a boxed product. DVG, Dan Burson Games, also has a deep dish counter tray, which is, I'm going to be like formal in saying that I believe it to be an inferior product, rather than offering my usual more colorful commentary about that particular tray. And the problem with it is that the lid does not lock down, making it thereby basically worthless as a product. So at the moment, the other tray that is available is what has been the de facto industry standard for quite a long time. This is what everybody calls the GMT tray, because GMT is the primary supplier of this style of tray in the US and has been for a long time. But I originally bought the first of these kind of trays that I actually bought directly from the gamers back in the day. So I'm not sure what the manufacturing details behind these trays are, but these have been the standard for a long time. And, you know, that's a pretty good tray. Assuming you get like a correct set, occasionally I'll run into one that's a problem. The lid locks, you know, nice and tight. I can have it upside down and it's not a big problem. But one of the sort of hidden issues that maybe folks don't think about is what's underneath. There's a lot underneath, and it's mostly air, right? This is all dead space here. This lip, this gutter right here, because this is a blow molded product, right? It's plastic that's blown by compressed air into a mold, and therefore a lot of the sides of this are effectively end up being wasted space, and you know, potentially for manufacturing reasons. The GMT trays have this sort of bevel where it's a little bit narrower at the bottom of the compartment than it is at the top of the compartment, so we can best see that. I'm not sure how well you're going to see that on the camera. This is a little dusty too, so I apologize for that. But you'll see how sort of narrow the ridge is right here. Well, it's probably twice as wide as that at the bottom. Now that's fine, but again, you know, it's more air in the tray, so. You know, maybe this isn't a style of tray that is necessarily the most efficient, but it's certainly a very good tray, and we've all been very happy with it for a long time and really haven't complained too much. If anything, the complaints have been that we can't fit enough of them in our GMT boxes. But, you know, I've been using this style of tray for like 20 years, right? For everybody's games, not just GMTs. So the Aegis tray, which is a you know, much more aggressively branded product, as we can see, still suffers from that, but because it's still a blow molded tray. But the compartment walls they're still a little bit beveled, but they're much less beveled. You can see that the gutters between the compartments are much smaller than they are on the GMT tray, particularly these gutters, right? Okay. The other gutters are closer, but this is still smaller. Now, I actually kind of was waiting to do this video because I actually ordered a digital caliper to perform all these measurements. But ultimately, what matters here is the compartment size. And you can see this Aegis tray looks bigger than the GMT tray, but that's largely because of this lip, right? The other thing with the GMT tray is the way that it locks. The GMT tray locks with a little indent right here and right here, so it's kind of locking at the top and bottom. It is trivially easy. And just to prove that it's trivially easy, now here is the Aegis tray filled with counters from the brand new BCS AirCore, and these are latching at the corners. So the corners will latch right here, but it's at all four corners, and this creates a bit of a weird issue. And I'm not sure to what extent you just have to get used to this. But the trays also have a cutout on this. The lids have a cutout on the top and bottom, and I think that's because of the way these things lock. So I think we're going to have a strategy session about how you open these, but here's how I've been doing it. I've been putting my finger right around here, my thumb right around here, and my finger on the corner, and I pull I hold the tray down with my thumb and pull up at the corner. Do the same thing with the other end. And then on the other side, I go and pull those up, and the lid lifts away. So once again, oh, and I somehow pulled a fatigue counter out with me. That goes right here. But again, I'll just go one corner, two corners, rotate it, three corners, four corners. You don't want what I call popping, which is a problem that you would see with the other brand of counter trays that are in production right now. This is the Chessex counter tray, and it's nice because it fits in an Avalon Hill box. It's a little bit smaller, but it's got pretty tight compartments, and popping it open almost always causes popping. And if there were counters in this, you would have seen the counters all pop each time I left out, I loosened one of those latches. That is a feature of these trays that I despise, but I still do use these trays occasionally just because, like I said, they do fit in Avalon Hill trays. Now, one of the concerns that I had was, hey, GMT's boxes today are actually a little bit smaller than they used to be. And that's because of the differences in manufacture. Now, the GMT trays, the current GMT trays, fit into those no problem, but sometimes you'll have older GMT trays that are just a little bit wider, just by like a millimeter or two, and you'll actually have trouble. They'll fit very tight. They'll actually sort of drag against one side, and they'll fit very tight in the tray. Is that a big deal? Not really. But what I was concerned with was when I started to see pictures of these Aegis trays, let me mention, if I haven't mentioned it before, they were kind enough to send me 10 of these trays for my evaluation. So thank you, Aegis, for doing that, but we're giving you an honest evaluation here too, which they certainly is what they asked me to do. This is the box for Vietnam 65 to 75, so it's one of the new GMT boxes, and I'm pleased to report that this Aegis tray fits in almost exactly. And you can see that it's a bit bigger in all dimensions than the GMT trays. So what that does mean is that if some games, and I actually do this from time to time, if there's like a small deck of cards, for example, I'll fit it into the side. I did that with U.S. Civil War, for example. Won't be able to probably do that with this because it's right up to the edge. And this little cutout of the lid actually is what I'm using to extract the tray from the box at this time. So now the other variable here is the size of the compartments. I know that some people have done measurements of their own and found different measurements, but I'm going to tell you the measurements that I got. And bear in mind that these, the Aegis trays are new. I'm going to guess and say there has probably been one manufacturing run of Aegis trays, ever. Whereas the GMT style trays through GMT or whoever else these have been available through have been available for decades. There have been many manufacturing runs, and as you no doubt have discovered for yourself when you try to put an older lid with a newer tray, there are some differences such that not everything necessarily fits. So I'm going to give you my measurements and understand that that is not necessarily a claim that other folks have had incorrect measurements. They may have had a different manufacturing run of these trays. But when I measure them, the Aegis tray is 16.3 millimeters tall, and the GMT tray is 16.7 millimeters tall. The difference is very small, but the GMT tray is actually a little taller. Now, the indents on the top of the tray, on the GMT tray, which I didn't measure because they would have been awkward to measure, are like visibly shallower than the indents on the top of the Aegis tray. So what that means is that in principle, when you go to stack these trays, and you put, say, 3 of them together, you may end up with a different result because the heights are not necessarily additive. So what I found when I stacked 3 GMT trays is that they were 45.3 millimeters tall, and the Aegis trays were 48 millimeters tall. So the GMT trays stack slightly more compactly than the Aegis trays, even though individually the GMT trays are a tiny bit taller. I mean, you would never, the difference is not even visible. It's 0.3 millimeters, right? So it's really tiny. Now the other thing here, and I picked these 2 games specifically because they have bigger counters. They have specifically 5/8 inch counters, which are mostly the largest counters that you encounter in wargaming nowadays. Every once in a while, you'll see counters that are larger, that are in metric measurements, or there are, some games that have 1-inch counters. So this is going to be a little bit different if you have a game with half-inch counters versus 5-inch counters. But you can see visibly that and I'll pull these out and show you. And once again, this will be a test of how good my opening method on the Aegis tray is, which I'm not having too much trouble. You can see, again, same counter size, right? If we pull this, by the way, is from CSS Saipan from Compass. You can actually see they're the same size counters due to manufacturing tolerance differences. The multi-man counter is just the tiniest, like, width of the thickness of a piece of paper wider. But you can see that I can fit 2 of these side by side in an Aegis compartment with no problem. But if I go to try to put 2 of them side by side in a GMT tray compartment, you'll see that they overlap by a considerable percentage of the width of the counter. And that is because the compartments are narrower, but also because of that bevel at the edge on the counter, the compartment walls, which is much wider at the bottom on the GMT tray than it is at the top. That bevel is still here on the Aegis tray, but it's much, much more subtle. So for this reason, particularly, you're going to be able to get more counters in the Aegis tray per compartment than you are in the GMT tray. That's not necessarily as big an advantage as it sounds, because you're not just trying to store the counters in the tray, right? You're trying to organize them, and maybe you needed smaller compartments to organize them better depending on the game that you're trying to do. But, we've also all, I'm sure, run into the situation where you have, here's a compartment filled with US divisions, and there's just a few too many to comfortably fit in one compartment. You're going to have a little less of that problem here with the Aegis trays. The compartments are wider, they are longer, and interestingly, they measure at exactly the same depth of 17 millimeters. The length, meaning the height in this, I don't want to say this incorrectly, the long direction on the Aegis tray is 59 millimeters. The long direction on the GMT tray is 53.4 millimeters. That's 5 millimeters. That's, half a centimeter. That's a decent amount of the width of a half-inch counter. Now, the shorter dimension here, the Aegis tray is 36.8 millimeters wide, and the GMT tray, and this is at the bottom. I measured it at the bottom of the compartment, is 29.7. That's an even bigger difference of about 7 millimeters in width, and right here, you can really tell. You can really tell the difference here. And then the depth actually was super close. The depth on the Aegis compartment was 17 millimeters, and the depth on the GMT compartment was 17.2 millimeters. So the GMT tray, again, on the examples I have here and measured, is actually a little deeper, which makes sense because that's about the amount by which this GMT tray is taller than the Aegis tray. And I did... I'll point out that I did do my measurements for that with the lids on. This is, I'm completely guessing here, but I'm guessing that this is about a 3 mil thickness, so 0.3 millimeters thickness on the plastics in both cases. The quality of the plastic construction is pretty equivalent in both cases. I think that this particular GMT tray, it feels thicker than this Aegis tray, but I've also got, and this is a relatively new, I think, bought last year GMT tray, but I've also got some older GMT trays from older production runs that feel really thin, much thinner than the way this Aegis tray feels. Now, we do have the embossing here, and I did not feel qualified to make or try to measure what difference the embossing on the insides of the tray compartments made to the ability to store counters in the tray. It may be that number is insignificant. So, we have a new source of counter trays, and I do really rather like these Aegis counter trays, and I certainly would like to use them, especially for games where the counters are bigger or where I otherwise feel the need for a bit roomier compartments. I still like the GMT trays, And I'm sure I've got a stack of them here yet. Not many, because I'm almost out, and unfortunately GMT appears to be out of them right now. And interestingly, GMT's counter trays page has been removed from the website or is otherwise unreachable. Aegis Storage does not have a website yet, because we jumped the gun and I pressured them to give me a link that people could buy them. Because I wasn't going to say, hey, look at these awesome new counter trays, but you can't buy them yet. Have a nice day. I will provide a link in the video description to where you can get these. They are really nice. They have some idiosyncrasies with the way the lids are attached. But otherwise, they're really great. The other idiosyncrasy, and maybe this is not an idiosyncrasy, is that these are somewhat more expensive than the GMT trays. I do like these. I will absolutely continue to use these. I'm going to try to figure out how I can best employ the trays that I have in inventory right now. But if you're interested in getting your hands on some of these Aegis trays, there is a link in the video description. This is not like a sponsored video or anything like that. They just said, hey, we're going to send you some trays. And if you want to do a video on them, go ahead. That's literally, it's not a direct quote, but that's basically what they said. So not even like a solicitation. They just, were nice enough to send me some trays and told me I could do a video on it if I wanted. And it turns out they're really nice. So check them out. They are worth the time taken to investigate them and see how well they will work for your games. I hope that you have found this useful. If so, please do give it a thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to help support Ardwulf's Lair and the important work that we do here, please do consider becoming a patron. You can find a link to that in the video description. There are also links to the Ko-Fi and the merch store where you can buy cool Ardwulf's Lair swag, such as t-shirts and coffee mugs. Thanks and shout out to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy wargaming.